Hello everyone, and welcome back to my Bookish channel. I'm Paul, Paul Mars with a silent G. Um, People ask sometimes how it's pronounced. I've been here for just about a month doing these, and I've been loving doing them. I often thought it was something I'd like to do, just come on and talk about the books in my life, the books in my study, the things I enjoy reading. As it's gone on, I've learned a bit more about how the YouTube thing works and how people theme their videos so that they're kind of easily findable. I've tried doing that. It's nice. It's nice doing some on science fiction, on horror, new books, book hauls, all of that stuff. So you've got keywords. People are all kind of trying to bump up their numbers all the time, of course. I don't know if I'm bothered about that. I'm bothered about the things I want to talk about, which is uh, just books that I fancy talking about. And if there's not a theme, there's not a theme. They're just books that I like. So that's what I think I'll carry on doing. In some ways, the theme is just hashtag bookshelves, my bookshelves. Anyway, get yourself a cup of tea. Morgan Long is someone who I watch on YouTube a lot, and she always says pause the video and go and make a cup of tea and come back. And it's quite a good plan. Right, I've got a pile of things that come from my favorite bookcase. So they're from kind of beside my bed, things that I would, if if there was a massive flood and the bed turned into a raft or a floating bed, like in Bedknobs and Broomsticks, a film that I was obsessed with when I was little, uh, the bookcase beside it would be a kind of sidecar, or it would be a raft in itself, and I'd be set afloat with particular books. And I suppose that's in my thinking, my stupid adult thinking, when I choose what goes in my favourite bookcase. This is a book about reading, Bookworm by Lucy Mangan, who is a journalist who writes about TV mostly, very sensibly about TV. A few years ago, she wrote this book about childhood reading. It's actually 6 years ago now. But she writes about books that I just happen to love as well, things like Charlotte's Web, um, especially Charlotte's Web. And I thought this was a really smashing book. It went hand in hand with a few others about the same time. Kathy Rensenbrink, Rensenbrink, I think, did a book about reading much the same time, and I loved both. This one had the edge for me because it was closer to my own tastes, I suppose. She mentions people like Catherine Paterson and Bernard Ashley, people of a certain era, I suppose. 70s, 80s puffins. Anyway, that's a really smashing memoir, should you ever see it about. Another one, about the same time, Books for Living. Now, this is a wonderful writer, Will Schwalber, who a few years ago, this is 4 years ago now, Books for Living, and he has a chapter um, on each book. There's a whole bunch of them, quite a lot actually, more than I remember. And it's about it's about the books in his life. And there's a chapter on Giovanni's room. I've just remembered that. He has a kind of eclectic and wonderful taste and ranges over all genres. He relates his own reading back to his life. He also did a book, and I bet it's down there somewhere. I can't see it just now. Uh, about his mother when she was terribly ill and just before she died, and the End of Your Life book club. And they read the same books together. And it's very, very moving. I found all of his books moving. There are three in all. And this one, because oddly enough, it was just before lockdown that I read this. And there's lots in this about books saving your life or books being sustaining, kind of nourishment, really, that was useful during lockdown. Right, the lessons it taught. Although I hate the idea of book giving lessons, it's too schooly, but you know what I mean. Kate Mulgrew, How to Forget. Lots of books about about grief and difficult emotions, actually. I suppose maybe that's what is appealing about memoirs to me in recent years. This is a book about Kate Mulgrew's parents, and I read this while we were going back and forth to the hospital for Jeremy's mother, and it was a kind of salutary and really interesting experience. Reading this while terrible things were going on in our life. Kate Mulgrew, of course, is an actress, and she was Captain Janeway in Star Trek in the 90s. And I met her, worked with her a few years ago on an adaptation of some thrillers that I wrote for Audible Books, full cast, 12-hour long drama. And we got on very well. She's a good laugh and very sensible and an extremely good actor. And as it turns out, an extremely good writer. This is a very, very moving book about the decline and death of one parent, then the other, and the conjuring of this whole, quite eccentric in some ways, family. But it's a really, really lovely book. There's another memoir that she wrote about her earlier life, um, which I intend to read. It's in my pile of, I've got a pile of biographies, huge books down here. I can see them looking at me reproachfully, and she's there with Richard Burton, Roald Dahl, Beryl, Bainbridge, Dirk Bogarde, and lots of other people who I'm a big fan of. And for some reason, I haven't got round to them. A huge book about Angela Carter as well. I should talk about Angela Carter at some point on one of these videos. Some of these are quite dusty. Another memoir, Grace Dent, Hungry. She's a journalist, a very witty one, from the Northwest, from I think near Carlisle. This is a book about eating and about eating ordinary food, the food that we were given as kids on council estates, Finder's crispy pancakes and stuff like that, fish fingers, beef burgers, the 70s, Angel Delight, and and Arctic rolls. She writes so well. And she, I think, grew up more or less the same time as me. So it hits lots and lots of interesting uh, points for me that are just so familiar. And I guess that's what we do as well when we read memoirs. We're looking for points of correspondence where their lives touch your experience in some way. Not because uh, it's not kind of pretending you're them or how they relate to you. It's not that. It's interesting, I think, when you're looking to empathize with somebody in their memoir. And sometimes cultural touchstones are it's a useful way of coming into somebody else's experience. And they're also very funny because there's things that you've forgotten about, Butterscotch Angel Delight or Name That Tune with Lionel Blair. Kind of naff cultural reference points are very sweet. And I guess books set in other eras have their own equivalents, but we get less sensitive to the to what those cultural touchstones mean, their ramifications. Now, here's someone who writes biographies of people in a different time, in a different place, in a different country. She's an American biographer, Deirdre Bear. Now, I read her book on Anais Nin. Was it? Was that her? A number of years ago. No, it wasn't her. She wrote about somebody else. And it was something I really liked. No, it was Anais Nin, the memoirist and diarist. She wrote a massive book. That should be on the shelf somewhere. Can't see it just now. This book is about the actual act of writing somebody's autobiography and the time she spent as an academic going between the States and Paris to talk to the horse's mouth, as it were. She wrote books on Simone de Beauvoir and Samuel Beckett at different points. And it's about the academic's life, getting the money, the research money to go, getting time off your academic job, and then going to this alien world, this other country, and working with these terrible egotists and gaining their trust and hearing their stories and gaining permission to write books about them, which wasn't easy with either de Beauvoir or Samuel Beckett. So she comes to stay in the left on the left bank, staying in hotels, meeting these people, and then going to their houses and getting embroiled in their quite complicated lives and becoming aware of the rivalry between writers. She moves from Beckett to de Beauvoir, and at different points, she has to avoid them in the street when they realize she's writing about the other one. So there's a lot of kind of unintended, well, a lot of incidental comedy in this. But mostly it's about sifting through the difficulties of other people's writing lives, and it's completely fascinating. One of the best books I read in 2021. It just caught my eye on Amazon, I think, and I was glad it did. Here's something that's not memoir biography, The Moomins. Tove Jansson, somebody whose autobiography I'd like to read, and her letters. There's a lot of kind of sentimental guff about Tove Jansson. She's become, the kind of hipster's favorite kids writer in lots of ways, and that's slightly annoying to those who liked her books before. This is a really lovely edition that Sort of Books did, where they printed it in a beautiful hardcover, but they found lots of the color illustrations from an Italian edition, apparently, and put together this huge, beautiful version with as many illustrations as they could find. And it was quite dear, it was quite expensive, but a thing of beauty. And it's the one where Moomin Troll wakes up early from hibernation and has to spend Christmas winter alone. Well, gains some friends, but his family still sleep. And it's a really, really lovely, wintry, cozy book. Yep, everything about that book is completely enjoyable. And as I wish, I wish more kids' books could get this kind of fancy treatment, um, with lots of drawings and lots of color like that. Now, this has leapt out into my hands again. I've got multiple copies of this book. Maybe the Moon by Armistead Maupin. Thinking about it because this isn't my signed one. My signed one must be elsewhere. I keep buying these. Um, I'm thinking about it because his new book is out. His 10th, I think, Tales of the City. And I was thinking of getting it this weekend when I'm kind of near a bookshop and I go to a bookshop in town, perhaps. I'm not mad keen, I have to say. I'm not sure why. I loved the first four, five, six that came out between whenever it was, 78 and 1990. And I read them all kind of from 1990 onwards. It was my first boyfriend, an American, who introduced me to the books, and I loved them and understood that they were finished and gone. And he's done three, now four since. And I find them kind of not as good. The charge has gone. He's appealing to a younger crowd. He's trying to write about generations much younger than him. And the TV show, which diverged from the books, was much worse. And I could go into all those reasons, but it's boring to pick fault with things. It was weird that it missed out Generation X completely. The baby boomers of the original books gave birth to the millennials. Very strange. Um, I really love the early ones. I love the adaptations. I love the comic strip version that came out last year, which not many people have mentioned. I've not seen anybody talk about that. I think it's a French uh, graphic novel based on the original Tales of the City. Anyway, all that's to say, I probably will buy his new book, but I've got an odd relationship in recent years with reading his stuff. 31 years ago, this came out. Uh, a fictionalized account of his friendship with his best friend, this woman who, in the novel, fits inside the tiny costume in a really famous fantasy film. Now, clearly, it's based on E.T. in real life, and it's fictionalized. And it's a lovely revenge story, but told in the voice of the tiny actress who the book's about. And she's raucous and um, flawed and just a marvelous, spiky character. So the whole thing's a first person account of somebody clawing her way back to the limelight. A limelight she was never really in, a limelight that didn't really ever want her. There she is living in a bungalow in the middle of Hollywood with a ditzy and lovable friend who, to my mind, should have been played by Gina Davis had they made a film in the mid-90s. Anyway, it's still my favourite novel of all time, which is why I suppose I judged the other Armistead Maupin books so harshly, and I do. But I really love what he does. And look, here's the original set in this edition that everybody had in the 90s. All the queers had these, and you could judge boyfriends by did they have these on the shelf? Whoops, along with Jeanette Winterson, people like that. There's the original. I've just dropped one on the floor. Oop, hang on, that was more. That's when they go on a cruise, isn't it? And the first one about the cannibals in the cathedral and the dropping foot and first getting to know everybody at Barbary Lane. Further, which God, is this the one where they meet the fella who's escaped from his own cult? It's a very odd one. Baby Cakes, Significant Others, and then somewhere Show Review, which I've got in hardback because it came out. It was published. I caught up with them and had to get it in hardback, I think, straight away in 1990. So that's when it all happened. It's a long time ago. And as I say, keeping up with writers over decades, like I do with people like Angela Carter, not Angela Carter, Ann Tyler, and various others, it's too much to ask that you love everything they do, I think. It's too much to put on the writers, too much expectation. If you love 3 books by one writer, and if you can follow them for decades, and that's what you get from it, that's enough. They don't owe you anything. And some of his books I really love. The first few of those, Tales of the Cities, and I love Maybe the Moon. I'll get the new one, and we'll see. There's a funny story. I can't really properly tell it, but we have a mutual friend actually who was looking after Maupin when he came to Britain about 15, 20 years ago, and came to Manchester. And I asked this friend, like, what were they doing after their event? They were doing in conversation somewhere. And I said, I'd love to meet him. And this mutual friend said, oh, well, that's my job. And I thought he meant to affect introductions. He said, no, to keep people like you away. So that was nice. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. It was a bit of a slight. So I've never met. I have met Armistead Maupin once in the signing queue for Maybe the Moon in 1993 as a punter going to buy my book. I had a literary lunch in Manchester in a hotel that's now been knocked down, and that was a really lovely do. I went with a good friend then, somebody who's wandered out of my life, but we went for an afternoon and had lunch in Manchester, and before I lived here, and heard him read from this fantastic book. And maybe that's one of the reasons I love the book so much, that it was such a nice introduction to it. But I think the book has to be good as well. There's something special about Maybe the Moon. Definitely. It's a romance, but romance against the odds. Romance, a very kind of pragmatic and in the end bittersweet romance. And in such a caustic and profane voice. Yep. I can't see it being replaced as my favourite book ever anytime soon. Anyway, a month into doing these videos, it seems like a good time to be telling you which is my favourite ever book. So that's what I've done. I hope you can cope with there not being particular themes to these, just me going on. I hope that's all right, but let me know. Give me your comments. I've got a few comments to catch up on, but I love getting them. Do subscribe. and this will go out on Monday. So happy new week, everybody. It's Saturday here, and I'm about to go into town to stand next to a life-sized picture of Judy Garland, which I've drawn, which is going to be unveiled on Canal Street in the park, next to a yellow brick road made of flowering daffodils. So that's my afternoon, as well as some book shopping. So there'll be photos, I imagine, from that particular adventure. Right. Goodbye. Subscribe and take care, and see you again in the next episode of this thing, whatever it is. Goodbye.